So this is an interesting idea, isn't it? Today we are going over a conversation that I saw popping up on Twitter and Reddit quite often the past few days, and a lot of this has to do with the Detroit Red Wings and a potential name that has been subjected to a whole bunch of trade rumors over the past little while, and an article published on thehockeywriters.com linking the two parties together. It's easy, you can tell from the title, you can tell from the thumbnail who exactly it is we are talking about, but Devin Little's article on the Hockey Writers sums it up in the title: The Red Wings and the Ducks should discuss a Trevor Zegras trade. Now, I know what you may be thinking. If you're a Wings fan, you might be thinking about this saying, okay, that's cool, like, Trevor Zegras is a young NHL player, he's had decent levels of NHL success this year. He's in a struggling spot in Anaheim, and if he's on the market, he's available. He may be available at a discount too. Maybe Stevie Y should go out there and do that. Yeah, plus it'd be cool to have a guy be able to do the Michigan goal in Michigan. That's a pretty interesting narrative that certainly won't get annoying after the first two times the commentators say it on TV. But what gives? And for the most part, this article written by Devin Little is a pretty good read. He goes over some good conversations about both of the parties, how Zegras has been a pretty good prospect ever since getting drafted in 2019. He was drafted behind Seider, 3 picks behind him. Seider was 6th overall and Zegras was 9th overall. Then you have the Calder race 3 years later, where both Zegras and Seider were important figures. And then you have yourselves the lore, I guess, of what Trevor Zegras is and how he's been in the NHL. Little goes out there and writes this: although the cost to acquire the young forward would be pretty high, Red Wings GM Steve Yzerman should definitely call his former assistant GM Pat Verbeek to see if there's a way their two teams can come together on a deal. Afterwards, though, the article goes over a really distinct thought process, pretty much saying that because Zegras is super fancy, that's why the Red Wings should get him. Most hockey fans are familiar with Zegras at this point in his career. Not only was a 22-year-old forward on the cover of EA Sports NHL 23 alongside Sarah Nurse, but his name has been mentioned countless times across the NHL's website, YouTube, ESPN, and other outlets due to his flashy style of play. During his rookie season, Zegras drew the ire of old-school hockey minds that prefer conservative team play over a single player skilling it up. In a lot of ways, he represents the new wave of NHL talent that places an emphasis on skill and creativity. The article then says that this is like Patrick Kane, how he could provide a lot of the same things that Kane provides for the Wings. Like Kane, Zegras is an adept playmaker that is proficient at creating space for himself and his teammates. He's not going to bring a physical edge in the lineup, but he will frustrate opponents by making plays in their offensive zones. Like Kane, Zegras also grew up in the state of New York, likely contributing to the big city flair that both players possess. And the article goes over a few extra things, but before we dive into those, I wanted to just respond to that particular idea it brings up at the beginning and say, dude, I don't know about you, but would a super skilled and flashy player in Zegras' position really be in a position where Steve Yzerman would want to capitalize on that? For Patrick Kane, it's a little bit different because Kane, as we acknowledge, is one of the best American players of all time, if not the best. Multi-time Stanley Cup champion, multi-time award winner in the NHL, Hart Trophy, Art Ross Trophy, Conn Smythe Trophy. Kane is proven, and he was in a position where there was a very distinct connection between him and some of the players already on the team. He wanted to play with DeBrincat, and that was not surprising. So, seeing Kane be placed onto the Red Wings, especially with the professionalism involved here, Patrick Kane certainly is like an experienced pro at this point. He's super old, but there's a certain level of maturity, I think, that Kane has that the Red Wings were attracted to. Not necessarily saying that Trevor Zegras doesn't have that, but Zegras is a lot younger, he's less experienced, he doesn't have the hardware that Kane does, he doesn't have the longevity, so I could understand a world where it's like, okay, if Pat Verbeek is already kind of not vibing with Trevor Zegras and his play, I don't really see how Steve Yzerman would instead. In fact, that's what the top comment on the Red Wings sub goes out there and says. There's a post made by Rockshot, the same article that we're looking at here. If available, should the Wings try for Zegras, they ask. The top comment goes out there and says this: Pat Verbeek learned a lot of his values for player evaluation during his time in the Wings front office. There's a strong likelihood that Yzerman has the same sentiment on Zegras as Pat Verbeek and won't even kick the tires. Another reply goes out there and asks the question, isn't the reason he might be up for grabs because he lacks a 200-foot game? And then the replies go out there and say, yeah, but he also only has 7 points in 20 games this season. There then is a debate as to the importance of two-way game among Zegras' profile. Ducks fans have said he's really focusing on his defensive game this year, and if that tanks your points by like 60%, you're probably just not that great, because the truly elite players are good 200 feet, and if you can't score when you play sound defense, you can't score. No one gets a free pass to score 70 points with no defensive game. He would have to put up like 140 points a year to completely abandon the D-zone on a Steve Yzerman team. And while I don't disagree with these sentiments, I do want to give the benefit of the doubt a little bit more, because Trevor Zegras is only 22 years old. I mean, there still is a lot of room for this guy to grow and become better, and if that means developing a defensive side of the game that we don't really see too much of nowadays, I could honestly believe it. Sure, truly elite players will normally have instinctual habits of defensive and offensive game more in tune earlier on in their careers than others, but it's not impossible for guys like these to grow and become better, especially since Zegras has been such an offensive wizard the past few years. Maybe playing defense is brand new to him. Maybe this is something that he's not really experienced too much, but still, when it comes to the profile of what is right now, he's making $5.75 million a year till the end of 2026. The Ducks signed him to a short-term bridge deal because they did not like his game enough to go along with him. And realistically, if you're talking about the developments, are the Red Wings in a position where they can afford to watch this guy develop and be there for his development while they go through their own journey on top of that? While I do believe that Trevor Zegras can get better, and I do give the benefit of the doubt, that benefit of the doubt does not apply to the Red Wings. I don't think they're in a position where they could patiently wait for Zegras to become a better defensive player and become a lot more consistent and have that reign to do pretty good offensive things in a season where he's slumping hard, only 7 points in 20 games. So, while there may be some other teams that would be more suited to help Zegras grow and develop, and that would be patient with him as he's going through these tough times, the Red Wings do not strike me as a team that would be in that position. It just doesn't seem like it'd be a fit. Patrick Kane is one thing, but when you talk about him and his story with the surgery and the uncertainty and he wanted to play with DeBrincat, it was almost like all the factors aligned to make this work. For Trevor Zegras, it seems like many of the factors are disaligned, and those differences, I feel like, they were always kind of there, they're subconscious. Like, the idea of Zegras and Detroit just doesn't really fit, in my mind at least, when I read the title of the article, and upon further inspection, just kind of thinking about it a little bit more, yeah, no, this doesn't really feel like a proper fit. So, Devin Little, the article will be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and read his piece on the hockey writers. There are a few extra things that we can talk about. I guess we can go for it, see what Little's main thesis is. Zegras' weak two-way game does not and should not devalue him as an asset. However, just like Kane, Ovechkin, and many other offense-first players across the NHL, the trick with players like him is to understand their limitations and put them in a position to build on their strengths. You don't acquire Zegras to throw him on the penalty kill, you acquire him to juice up the power play. Another thing the Wings and GM could consider is where he's coming from. Verbeek, the Ducks GM, was Yzerman's assistant GM going back to their time in Tampa. So, if Verbeek has made Zegras available, Yzerman was probably one of the first people to know, and the GM of the Wings likely knows why Verbeek would be more interested in moving on from a good young player like Zegras. And so, of course, while it's an interesting enough idea to bring up, like, oh yeah, talented player is available for trade, why should we not trade for him? Stylistically with the player and in terms of how the team themselves build themselves up, what Derek Lalonde has these guys going for, it just doesn't feel like a fit. And for Stevie Y, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he himself just straight up wasn't interested. Like, of course, everybody has to be interested in young players that have 60-plus point seasons getting available for trade, but when circumstances align like this, he is hurt, he is not producing as much, he's trying to play defensively more, and he's not really doing it all too well. The Red Wings probably aren't in a position to baby him and be in a patient spot to allow that to grow more. Especially considering their own uprising and the way they have been making progress, it just doesn't really feel right. So, if you agree, sure, let me know in the comments if you do. If you disagree, then that's totally fine as well. Let me know in the comments why the Red Wings should go after Trevor Zegras. But for now, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below about this entire video and the idea itself. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.